Today we're going to talk about Trump's claims of election fraud, how they're holding up in court, and one especially humiliating moment that pretty much sums up the whole post-election landscape for Republicans, and it comes from Tucker Carlson. I also interview former Obama and National Security Council spokesman Tommy Vitor about Trump's sudden firing of the entire Pentagon leadership and whether that might mean he's trying to steal the election. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen, and you're listening to No Lie. We're now at the point where Joe Biden's popular vote margin is beyond 5 million votes. The Electoral College margin is 306 to 232, which, by the way, is the same exact margin Trump won by in 2016, and also the same margin that Kellyanne Conway herself tweeted landslide, blowout, historic. But instead of accepting the outcome, Trump's now engaged in a sustained attack against the election results, tweeting incessantly about how the results were rigged, how Republican observers weren't present, how the voting machines are switching votes, how dead people are casting ballots. Every day is a relentless barrage of misinformation. Now, let me start with this. Here's what the same people who are now screeching about how Trump can still win this thing said in 2016. Here's Fox and Friends' Steve Doocy and Brian Kilmeade.
Brian, they're saying it's rigged, but they have absolutely no evidence that it's rigged.
I don't even think we should give him the time of day. Also, he's about to win. We know it's a matter of time, about to win Michigan officially. So that would put Donald Trump over the top with over 300 electoral votes. It was a blowout. It was a blowout. I just wonder what these Democrats are doing, trying to convince their electoral representatives not to vote the way the people want it.
There are 6 of them.
Now there's these states. Let's have a recount.
Here's Tucker Carlson.
It's a crisis when the people running your democracy don't believe in democracy.
Here's Sean Hannity.
They have no actual proof of voter fraud or any wrongdoing, and both the White House and the Wisconsin Elections Commission have both said zero evidence whatsoever.
Here's Judge Janine.
We believe in free speech. We believe in accepting winners and not being sore losers.
And here's my favorite, Kayleigh McEnany.
You have people out there calling for recounts that are unsubstantiated based on no evidence. You have Jill Stein coming on our network an hour or so ago suggesting that there were hacks or potentially hacks, and we won't know until we count the votes. There are people trying to delegitimize the president-elect of the United States.
And let's compare that with Kayleigh this go around.
It would look pretty bad if he did not attend the inauguration. It would look like sour grapes, wouldn't it?
I think the president will attend his own inauguration. He would have to be there, in fact.
Throw Mike Pompeo into the mix.
Is the State Department currently preparing to engage with the Biden transition team? And if not, at what point does a delay hamper a smooth transition or pose a risk to national security?
There will be a smooth transition to a second Trump administration.
And we can go on, but you get it, right? I just think it's funny how quickly things change when you don't actually stand for anything, when you are just a barren husk of talking points desperate to cling on to power. So here's the deal. If it wasn't already clear, Trump knows he lost. His administration knows he lost. His mouthpieces know he lost. Conservative media knows he lost, but he won't admit it. And there are a few reasons for that. First is money. Every day, Trump has been peppering his supporters with emails and texts soliciting donations for his election defense fund. Only when you read the fine print, you realize that it's not actually going to his election defense fund because that would be akin to setting it on fire. In actuality, it's getting split between paying off his campaign debt and going to the RNC. So, Trump is broke yet again, and he's preying on his gullible supporters to bail him out by convincing them that it's their donations that are going to save him. I've said this 1,000 times before, and I'll say it again. There is no one who Trump and Republicans have more disdain for than their own supporters. They are nothing but untapped wallets to him. That's all. Another reason that Trump won't admit it is his ego. Trump has groomed his supporters to believe 2 things. First, that there's nothing worse than a loser. And second, that Joe Biden is the weakest candidate to ever exist on God's green earth, right? According to Trump, Biden's in cognitive decline. He's old, he's weak, he's confused. He doesn't know what day it is or where he is. And now, not only is Trump a loser, but he lost to that guy. He has quite literally become the thing that he hates most in this world. But because he is way too insecure to handle that kind of humiliation, he'd rather just cry foul and pretend the whole thing is rigged. He'd rather convince half the country not to trust our own electoral system. He'd rather undermine faith in the most core tenet of our democracy, our free and fair elections, than acknowledge reality because of his extremely fragile ego. And then, of course, there's the issue of, actually believing that he'll steal the election. And look, on one hand, this is a guy who's got nothing but disdain for the rule of law in our institutions. He literally got himself impeached for extorting a foreign country for dirt on Joe Biden and then orchestrating a large-scale, top-down cover-up to hide his involvement. He's committed campaign finance violations. He's likely going to be under investigation for tax fraud. And so clearly, he's not going to be deterred by something so trivial as the will of the American people, as the results of the election, right? So would he have any qualms about stealing it? Absolutely not. But on the other hand, I think the issue here lies with the fact that he's got no avenue to do that. And God knows he's tried. The Trump campaign has been in court all over the country trying to make this happen. As of this recording, the Trump campaign has lost, I believe, 20 lawsuits. 20. And most of them were completely frivolous. But I do want to touch on a couple because Trump has basically predicated his entire disinformation campaign on these talking points. He's been claiming that observers from his campaign weren't allowed to watch the ballot counting process. He's tweeted this claim out dozens of times. It's been picked up by right-wing media. In Philadelphia, the Trump campaign brought this issue to court. The judge, Paul Diamond, who is a George W. Bush appointee, asked the Trump lawyers, quote, "Are your observers in the counting room?" The Trump lawyers responded, "There's a non-zero number of people in the room." The judge replied, "I'm asking you as a member of the bar of this court, are people representing the plaintiffs in the room?" To which the Trump lawyers responded, "Yes." I don't know how you can make it much clearer that what Trump is alleging is pure bullshit than his own attorney admitting that the entire basis for their claim that they have no observers in the room is false. That he'll spout this stuff publicly, but when they have to tell the truth in court, suddenly it's a different story. Here's another one. I'm sure you've heard the right-wing bubble wailing about Dominion. Dominion is a voting system vendor. Now, Republicans are claiming that this system had allegedly switched 435,000 votes from Trump to Biden, and that Dominion also deleted 2.7 million votes for Trump, including 1 million Trump votes in Pennsylvania alone. Only, it turns out that the source for this claim was an anonymous poster on a pro-Trump web forum called The Donald. That was picked up by the Gateway Pundit, which was picked up by OAN, which was repeated by Trump. That is the problem with a right-wing media feedback loop where literally nothing is vetted. It's just unfettered bullshit that fails all the way to the top. So no, as much as this is the perfect amount of obscure and nefarious for right-wing media, there is no Dominion voting conspiracy against Donald Trump. Finally, here's my favorite one. The idea that dead people are voting. One particular claim was that thousands of people born on January 1st, 1900 cast ballots, meaning that either a bunch of 120-year-olds went to the polls this year, or that other people were using their likeness to cast ballots illegally. But it turns out that when a system is transferred from analog to digital, the default input for a birthday is, you guessed it, 1100, or January 1st, 1900. It is a clerical error, not evidence of widespread voter fraud. There was a claim from Wayne County, Michigan, that 14,000 dead people voted. Only for most of those people, while some might be on the rolls, there was no evidence that they received or cast ballots. So again, just a baseless conspiracy theory, especially considering Michigan checks ballots against death records, specifically so that ballots cast by those who've died are not counted. But here's my favorite part, and evidence of that exact right-wing feedback loop I was just talking about. Tucker Carlson, the most watched host on Fox News, went on air and parroted this exact conspiracy, claiming that a World War II veteran named James Blaylock voted in Georgia, even though he passed away in 2006. Here's Tucker's bombshell investigative reporting piece.
In some ways, it's an inspiring story, the triumph of voting over death. And no one quite embodies that story like James Blaylock of Covington, Georgia. Mr. Blaylock was a mailman for 33 years until he passed away in 2006. 14 years later, according to state records, he was still mailing things. James Blaylock cast a ballot in last week's election.
Only not so much, because James Blaylock didn't vote, his wife did, using her married name, Mrs. James Blaylock.
He's not voted. He didn't vote.
It was you.
It was me.
President of the United States was accusing you of voter fraud, essentially.
Oh, I know it. And I knew it wasn't fraud.
Is there anything you'd like people to know about your husband? Because I'm sure he's dearly missed.
Best man I ever knew. Best one to me. I couldn't have had a better one.
Nothing like accusing the dead husband of a 94-year-old widow of voter fraud on national television. And then he had to go on TV and issue this apology.
We've got some good news tonight and an apology. One of the people who voted in last week's election isn't dead. Now, James Blaylock is still dead. We told you about him. But it was his wife who voted. She voted as Mrs. James Blaylock. It's old-fashioned, and we missed it. Now, a whole bunch of dead people did vote. We showed you their names. We proved it. But James Blaylock was not among them. It was Mrs. James Blaylock. So apologies for that. And, of course, we're always going to correct when we're wrong, and we were.
But let's be real here. You can't put the toothpaste back in the tube. And the point is that Tucker made this claim in the first place. A claim that these Republicans then repeated ad nauseum in their desperation to prove that voter fraud was real. But here's the simple truth. If there was actually evidence of fraud, the Trump campaign would have brought it up in court, period. That is their venue to prove any of this. And yet the fact that they can't and that they haven't even tried is all the proof you need that this is nothing more than a purposeful disinformation campaign. It's meant to get these Trump supporters to empty their wallets, to defend Trump, to reject the legitimacy of Biden's win and ultimately his presidency, but it's all fake. They just can't fathom the reality of a post-Trump world because they've so thoroughly hitched their wagons to his. So my advice here is simple. Ignore the noise. Ignore the conspiracy theories and absurd claims and bombshell reporting from OAN and Fox. The American people voted for Joe Biden. The states will certify those results, and Joe Biden will take office on January 20th, 2021. And if Trump really wants to try and stay, I'm sure there would be a solid 80 million Americans who'd happily tune in to watch him get dragged out of the White House by the Secret Service. To watch my interview with Tommy Vitor, where we'll talk specifically about Trump's firing of the entire Pentagon leadership and whether Trump did it to try and set the stage to steal the election, check out the interviews playlist on my YouTube channel. And check out the post description for links to both volunteer and donate to the Senate runoffs in Georgia through Vote Save America. That's it for this episode. Talk to you next week.